The arrow pierced Cordelia's shoulder with a wet thud as she stumbled behind the overturned wagon, her pale hand slick with blood that wasn't entirely her own. The screams of the dying settlers had fallen silent an hour ago, leaving only the crackle of flames consuming what remained of their makeshift camp and the distant war cries of retreating Apache raiders. "Please," she whispered to the empty prairie, her voice barely audible over the wind that swept across the Nebraska grasslands. The 17-year-old clutched the wooden cross her mother had pressed into her palm before the first arrow found its mark between her eyes. Now Cordelia was alone, abandoned by the surviving members of the wagon train who had fled westward in their panic, leaving the wounded behind without a second thought. Captain Mordecai Hastings had looked her straight in the eye before spurring his horse away. "Girl's done for anyway," he told his remaining men. "We ain't got time for dead weight." The words echoed in her mind as she pressed her torn petticoat against the wound, feeling her strength ebb with each heartbeat. The sun climbed mercilessly overhead, baking the blood-soaked earth beneath her. Cordelia's lips cracked and her vision blurred as delirium set in. She thought of her father's farm back in Missouri, of the apple trees that would be blooming white and pink this time of year, of her younger sister Magnolia who had begged to come west but was deemed too frail for the journey. By afternoon, the buzzards began circling. Cordelia could no longer feel her legs, and the arrow in her shoulder had worked deeper with every movement. She closed her eyes and waited for the darkness to claim her, whispering the Lord's Prayer through cracked lips. The ground trembled beneath approaching hoofbeats. Cordelia forced her eyes open, expecting to see Apache warriors returning to claim scalps from the dead. Instead, a massive figure on horseback emerged from the heat shimmer on the horizon. As he drew closer, she could make out the distinctive silver and turquoise jewelry of the Navajo, the long black hair flowing loose down his back, and the most piercing dark eyes she had ever seen. Keahani dismounted in one fluid motion, his 6'8" frame casting a shadow over her broken form. He had been tracking the Apache war party that had slaughtered the white settlers when he came upon this unexpected survivor. The girl was beautiful even in her suffering, with hair like spun copper and eyes the color of sage honey. Most of his people would have left her to die. White settlers brought nothing but trouble and heartache to the Dine. But something in her defiant gaze as she looked up at him stirred something deep in his chest. "You fight death like a warrior," he said in accented English, kneeling beside her. His massive hands were surprisingly gentle as he examined her wounds. "But death is patient. It will wait while I decide if you deserve to live." Cordelia tried to speak but only managed a whisper. "Why?" Keahani's weathered face showed no emotion as he carefully lifted her onto his horse. "Because the spirits have shown me a vision of copper hair dancing in firelight. Today I understand what it means." Consciousness returned to Cordelia in fragments. The scent of sage and cedar smoke, the soft murmur of unfamiliar voices, and a deep, rhythmic chanting that seemed to pulse through her very bones. When she finally opened her eyes, she found herself lying on a bed of soft furs inside what appeared to be a traditional hogan, the dome-shaped dwelling of the Navajo people. An elderly woman with kind eyes and deeply lined skin sat beside her, grinding something with a stone mortar and pestle. She looked up when Cordelia stirred and called out in the Navajo language. Within moments, the massive warrior who had found her ducked through the doorway, having to bend nearly in half to fit through the entrance. "You wake," Keahani said simply, settling cross-legged beside her sleeping furs. Grandmother Ayesha was beginning to think the healing ceremonies would not be enough. Cordelia tried to sit up but gasped as pain shot through her shoulder. The elderly woman, Ayesha, gently pressed her back down and spoke rapidly to Keahani in their native tongue. "She says you must rest. The arrow pierced deep, and fever spirits fought for your soul for 7 days." His dark eyes studied her face intently. "Tell me your name, white girl." "Cordelia," she managed, her voice hoarse from disuse. Cordelia May Whitmore. The wagon train ... are they ... Gone, Keahani said flatly. They left you to die like a wounded animal. This is the way of your people. They abandon the weak. Shame burned in Cordelia's chest, not just for the cowardice of the settlers, but for the hatred she had been taught to feel toward the savage Indians. Yet here she was, alive only because this man had shown her more mercy than her own kind. Why? Did you save me? She asked. Keahani was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving to the fire pit where flames danced hypnotically. Among my people, we believe the spirits guide us to our destiny. For 3 seasons, I have dreamed of a woman with hair like burnished copper who would bring great change to my life. When I saw you dying beneath the sun, I knew you were the one from my visions. Aisha continued grinding her herbs, occasionally glancing between them with what might have been approval. She had been Keahani's grandmother by marriage, and at 62, she had seen many strange things in her long life. But never had she witnessed her grandson show such gentle care for anyone, least of all a white woman. I don't understand, Cordelia whispered. You will, Keahani replied, rising to his full, imposing height. But first you must heal. Aisha will teach you our ways, and you will learn why the spirits brought you to us. Over the following weeks, as Cordelia's strength gradually returned, she began to understand the complexity of Navajo life. Aisha proved to be not only a skilled healer but a patient teacher, showing Cordelia how to weave wool into beautiful blankets, how to prepare traditional foods, and slowly teaching her words in the Navajo language. Keahani visited daily, bringing fresh game from his hunts and news from the outside world. He spoke of the growing tensions between his people and the white soldiers who sought to force all Navajo onto a distant reservation. His own band had so far avoided capture by staying mobile, moving their camp every few weeks to remain hidden in the vast wilderness of their ancestral lands. The white soldiers call it progress, he told her one evening as they sat outside the hogan watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. But we call it the end of everything we have ever known. Cordelia felt the weight of guilt settle over her shoulders like a heavy blanket. I'm sorry, she said quietly, for what my people have done to yours. Keahani turned to study her profile in the dying light. You are not responsible for the actions of others, Copperhair, but you must choose who you will become. 3 months had passed since Keahani found Cordelia dying on the prairie, and she had grown stronger in both body and spirit. Her shoulder had healed completely, leaving only a small scar as a reminder of that terrible day. Under Ayasha's patient guidance, she had learned to cook traditional Navajo meals, to weave intricate patterns into wool blankets, and to speak enough of the language to hold simple conversations with the other women in their band. But it was during the evening hours, when she and Keahani would walk together along the ridge overlooking their camp, that Cordelia felt most at peace. He spoke to her of things she had never imagined, the spiritual significance of the 4 sacred mountains, the complex clan relationships that govern Navajo society, and the ancient stories passed down through generations of his people. Your government wants to move all Dine to a place called Bosque Redondo, he told her one evening as they watched the stars emerge in the desert sky. A prison camp where we would depend on their food, their rules, their permission to breathe. Will you go? Cordelia asked, though she dreaded the answer. Keahani's jaw tightened. I would rather die free on the land of my ancestors than live as a captive in a foreign place, but the soldiers grow bolder. Soon they will find us. That night, Cordelia lay awake in the women's section of the hogan, listening to Ayasha's soft breathing and contemplating her uncertain future. She could no longer imagine returning to the white world that had abandoned her so callously. But Neither could she assume she would always be welcome among the Navajo, especially as tensions with the U.S. government escalated. The next morning, Keahani sought her out before dawn. "Come," he said simply, leading her away from the camp toward a sacred place he had shown her before, a natural amphitheater of red rocks, where his people had conducted ceremonies for countless generations. In the center of the circle, he had built a small fire. The flames cast dancing shadows on the ancient stone walls as he began to speak in formal tones. "Cordelia May Whitmore," he said, using her full name for the first time since she had told it to him. "You came to us broken, abandoned by your own people, left to die like a wounded animal. But you have shown courage in healing, wisdom in learning our ways, and respect for our customs." He reached into a leather pouch and withdrew something that made Cordelia's breath catch in her throat. It was a necklace of the most beautiful silver and turquoise she had ever seen, the metalwork so intricate it seemed to capture and hold the firelight within its curves. Among the Dine, when a man wishes to take a wife, he must prove his worthiness to her family and demonstrate that he can provide for her welfare. But you have no family here to speak for you, and the traditional ways may not serve us in these dark times. Keahani moved closer, his massive frame somehow both intimidating and protective in the firelight. "I ask you to become my wife, not just in the eyes of my people, but in your own heart. The spirits brought you to me for a purpose. Together we will face whatever comes, whether it be soldiers seeking to destroy our way of life, or the long journey to a new homeland where we must rebuild everything we hold dear." Cordelia felt tears spring to her eyes as she looked up into his weathered face. In the months since he had saved her life, she had come to admire not just his physical strength, but his quiet wisdom, his fierce loyalty to his people, and the gentle way he had cared for her during her recovery. "I know what I'm asking," he continued. "To marry me means turning your back forever on the white world. It means facing hardships alongside my people, sharing whatever fate awaits the Din. Some in your world would call you a traitor. Some in mine will always see you as an outsider." "And what do you see when you look at me?" Cordelia asked softly. Keahani's stern expression softened as he reached out to touch a strand of her copper hair. "I see the woman from my visions. I see strength that survived when others would have perished. I see someone who could stand beside me as we face the storms ahead." Without hesitation, Cordelia bowed her head so he could place the turquoise necklace around her throat. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will be your wife." The wedding ceremony took place during the full moon of what the whites called September, when the desert nights were still warm but carried the first hint of autumn's approach. Aisha had spent weeks preparing Cordelia's traditional wedding attire, a velveteen blouse in deep burgundy decorated with silver buttons, a flowing skirt in matching color, and elaborate silver jewelry that had been in Keahani's family for generations. "Today you become truly one of the people," Ayesha said as she helped Cordelia dress before dawn. The elderly woman's eyes were bright with tears of joy. "My grandson has chosen well. You have the heart of a warrior and the spirit of a survivor." The ceremony itself was unlike anything Cordelia could have imagined from her upbringing in Missouri. There was no church, no minister in a black suit preaching about sin and submission. Instead, the entire band gathered in the sacred circle of rocks as the sun rose, painting the desert landscape in shades of gold and pink. Keahani appeared magnificent in his traditional wedding attire, a white cotton shirt, dark pants, and a silver concho belt that caught and reflected the morning light. His long black hair was bound with leather and adorned with sacred feathers, and the turquoise and silver jewelry at his throat and wrists marked him as a man of importance among his people. The ceremony began with prayers offered in the four directions, acknowledging the sacred mountains that bounded traditional Navajo territory. An elderly medicine man named Hosteen Bige conducted the rituals, his weathered voice carrying across the stone amphitheater as he chanted in the ancient language. Marriage among the Dain is not just the joining of two people, he explained in English for Cordelia's benefit. It is the creation of a new clan relationship, a new harmony that strengthens the entire community. Cordelia and Kiahani sat facing each other across a basket filled with sacred cornmeal, their hands joined as Hosteen Bege continued the ceremony. They drank from a wedding vase, each sipping from opposite spouts to symbolize their separate lives coming together as one. As part of the ritual, Cordelia was given a new name in the Navajo language, Julgai Astze, meaning White Mountain, woman, in honor of both her pale skin and her strength in overcoming adversity. The name felt right on her tongue as she repeated it, sealing her transformation from abandoned settler girl to Navajo wife. The ceremony concluded as the sun reached its zenith, and the celebration that followed lasted well into the night. There was food in abundance, roasted mutton, fry bread, corn soup, and sweet cakes made with wild honey. The men played traditional songs on drums and flutes, while the women sang in harmonious voices that seemed to blend with the desert wind. As the evening grew late and the older members of the band began to retire to their hogans, Kiahani took Cordelia's hand and led her to the dwelling he had constructed for them, larger than the traditional hogans and built with special care to accommodate both their needs and his impressive height. "Are you afraid?" he asked softly. As they stood in the doorway of their new home, Cordelia looked up into his dark eyes, seeing there the same gentleness that had saved her life months ago. "No," she said truthfully. "For the first time since leaving Missouri, I feel like I'm exactly where I belong." Their wedding night was tender and passionate, a coming together that sealed not just their marriage vows but Cordelia's complete transformation from her former life. As she lay in Kiahani's strong arms afterward, listening to his deep, steady breathing and the night sounds of the desert, she felt a peace she had never known before. Outside their hogan, coyotes called to each other across the vast darkness, and somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted its ancient wisdom to the stars. Cordelia smiled and pressed closer to her husband's warmth, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Winter brought troubling news to their hidden camp in the high desert. Scout riders reported columns of blue uniformed soldiers moving through the territory, burning Navajo hogans and forcing families at gunpoint toward the internment camp at Bosque Redondo. Colonel Kit Carson's campaign to subdue all Navajo was intensifying, and even their remote location could no longer guarantee safety. "We must move deeper into the canyon country," Kiahani announced to the gathered band leaders during a tense council meeting. "The soldiers cannot follow us into places where their horses cannot go." Cordelia, now 6 months pregnant with her first child, sat beside her husband during these discussions. Her growing belly made travel difficult, but she had learned that among the Navajo, survival often required difficult choices and personal sacrifice for the good of the group. "The baby will come before spring," Ayasha said privately to Kiahani. After examining Cordelia, "Travel will be dangerous for both mother and child if we wait much longer." That very night, as if summoned by their fears, the sound of approaching horses broke the winter silence. Kiahani was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand, as shouts in English echoed off the canyon walls. "This is the United States Army." "Ah," voice called out. "You are ordered to surrender immediately and report to the reservation at Bosque Redondo." The camp erupted in controlled chaos as families quickly gathered their most precious possessions and prepared to flee into the maze of canyons that honeycombed the desert landscape. Cordelia struggled to rise, her advanced pregnancy making quick movement nearly impossible. "Go with the others," Kiahani told her urgently, helping her to her feet. Ayasha will guide you to the hidden spring where we cached supplies last autumn." "What? About you?" Cordelia gripped his arm, fear sharp in her voice. Someone must delay the soldiers to give the families time to escape. His dark eyes were fierce with protective determination. "I will follow when I can." Before Cordelia could protest further, gunshots erupted from the perimeter of the camp. Ayesha appeared at her side, taking her arm with surprising strength for a woman of her age. "Come, daughter," she said firmly. "Your husband fights to protect us all. We must not let his sacrifice be wasted." The next few hours were a nightmare of stumbling through dark canyon passages, following trails that seemed to exist more in memory than reality. Cordelia's back ached with each step, and she could feel the baby moving restlessly within her, as if sensing the danger that surrounded them. They reached the hidden spring just as dawn broke over the rim of the canyon. It was a secret place, known only to a few, where water seeped from the rock walls to form a small pool surrounded by ancient petroglyphs left by Keahani's ancestors. "Now we wait," Ayasha said, settling wearily on a flat boulder, "and pray to the spirits that our men return safely." The day stretched endlessly as they huddled in the natural shelter of the spring cave. Children whimpered softly when they were hungry, but the women shushed them with gentle hands, knowing that sound carried far in the desert silence. Cordelia found herself pressing her hands to her swollen belly, whispering prayers for Keahani's safety in both English and the Navajo words Ayasha had taught her as evening approached. The sound of footsteps on stone made everyone freeze with tension, but when Keahani's tall figure appeared at the mouth of the cave, intact and unharmed, the relief was palpable. "The soldiers are gone," he reported quietly, gathering Cordelia in his arms. "But they burned our winter food stores and killed most of the livestock. We cannot return." "Where will we go?" asked one of the other women. Keahani's expression was grim but determined. "North, to the sacred canyons where my grandfather's grandfather once hid from Spanish slave raiders. There are caves there where we can wait out the war, places the army will never find." That night, as they prepared for the dangerous journey ahead, Cordelia felt the first sharp pain low in her abdomen. She gasped and doubled over, her water breaking in a warm rush that soaked her skirts. "The baby comes," Ayasha announced, her voice carrying both excitement and concern. "Ready or not, this child will be born free under the desert stars." The labor began in earnest as the band took shelter in a deep alcove carved into the canyon wall by centuries of wind and water. Cordelia gripped Keahani's massive hands as another contraction seized her, her breath coming in sharp gasps that echoed off the ancient stone. "She is strong like her mother," Ayasha said approvingly as she prepared the birthing area with soft blankets and sacred herbs. "But this baby is eager to enter the world during troubled times." Outside their rocky sanctuary, snow had begun to fall, unusual for the high desert but not unheard of during harsh winters. The white flakes drifted past the cave opening like scattered prayers, and Keahani took it as a good omen that their child would be born during this rare blessing of moisture in the dry lands. "I'm frightened," Cordelia admitted between contractions, sweat beading on her forehead despite the cold air. "What if something goes wrong? There's no doctor, no." "Hush, daughter," Ayasha interrupted gently, her weathered hand surprisingly soothing as she massaged Cordelia's lower back. "I have brought many babies into this world. Your body knows what to do, just as your heart knew to accept my grandson's love." The labor continued through the night, with the other women of the band taking turns to help while the men maintained watch at the canyon approaches. Cordelia found herself drawing on reserves of strength she never knew she possessed, each wave of pain bringing her closer to holding her child near dawn. As the first pale light filtered into the cave, Cordelia felt the overwhelming urge to push Ayesha positioned herself to catch the baby while Keahani supported his wife's shoulders, his deep voice murmuring words of encouragement in both English and Navajo. "I can see the head," Ayesha exclaimed softly. "One more push, White Mountain. Woman, bring your child into the light." With a final surge of effort that seemed to draw on every ounce of her being, Cordelia felt the baby slip free from her body. The cave filled with the strong, healthy cry of a newborn, and she collapsed back against Keahani's chest, tears of relief and joy streaming down her face. "A son," Ayesha announced, holding up the squalling infant for them to see. "A strong son with his father's voice and his mother's fighting spirit." Keahani's usually stoic expression cracked as he looked down at his newborn child. The baby had a head full of dark hair and surprisingly light eyes that seemed to take in everything around him with alert intelligence. "What will you name him?" Ayesha asked as she cleaned the baby and wrapped him in soft rabbit fur. Keahani considered carefully, knowing that names held great power among his people. "Yigo Hastian," he said finally. "Strong man. He was born during our greatest trial, in a place between earth and sky, free from the bonds that would enslave our people." As Cordelia held her son for the first time, feeling his tiny fingers curl around her thumb, she marveled at how much her life had changed since that terrible day on the prairie. She had been abandoned by the white world, left to die like refuse, but had found not just survival but love, purpose, and now this perfect small life that represented the future. "He's beautiful," she whispered, touching the baby's soft cheek. "With one finger. Look how he watches everything, like he's trying to understand the world already." The baby seemed to study his mother's face with intense concentration, and when Keahani leaned down to touch his son's hand, tiny fingers immediately grasped his father's massive index finger with surprising strength. "He knows us," Keahani said with wonder in his voice. Already he recognizes his family. Outside the cave, the snow had stopped falling, and the desert landscape lay transformed under a blanket of pristine white. It was as if the earth itself had been made new to welcome their child, offering a fresh beginning despite all the troubles that surrounded them. "The soldiers will not search for us in weather like this," one of the scouts reported quietly to Keahani. "We have time to rest and let mother and baby recover strength before we continue north." 5 years had passed since Yigo Hastian's birth in the hidden canyon, and the small boy had grown into a sturdy, curious child who spoke both English and Navajo with equal fluency. His younger sister, Asta Wichksi, Red Woman, born 2 winters later with her mother's copper hair and her father's determined spirit, toddled after her older brother wherever he ventured. The war with the United States government had finally ended, but not in the way Keahani's people had hoped. Most of the Navajo had been forced onto the reservation at Bosque Redondo, where disease and starvation claimed many lives. But Keahani's band had remained hidden in the sacred canyons, surviving by their wits and their intimate knowledge of the harsh but beautiful landscape. Now, as Cordelia watched her children play among the ancient ruins where their band had made their home, she reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her to this place. She was no longer the frightened girl who had been abandoned by the wagon train. The desert sun had bronzed her skin, and years of hard living had made her strong and resourceful in ways she never could have imagined. "The soldiers are leaving," Keahani announced as he returned from a scouting expedition. "The government has agreed to let our people return from Bosque Redondo to a new reservation within our traditional lands. The long imprisonment is over." Cordelia looked up from the blanket she was weaving, her hands never pausing in their work. "Will we go to the reservation?" Keahani was quiet for a long moment, watching their son attempt to climb a boulder that was nearly twice his height. "The reservation means safety, schools for the children, regular food supplies. But it also means living under the watchful eyes of government agents, following rules made by people who do not understand our ways. And if we stay here, we remain free but always looking over our shoulders, never knowing if the next group of soldiers will be less willing to overlook a small band of renegades living off the reservation. He settled beside her on the woven mat, his presence both comforting and solid. "What do you think we should do, White Mountain Woman?" Cordelia considered carefully, knowing that her voice carried weight in this decision. Over the years, she had become not just Keahani's wife but a respected member of the band, sought out for her wisdom and her unique perspective as someone who understood both worlds. "I think," she said slowly, "that our children deserve the chance to choose their own path when they are grown. If we stay hidden forever, they will know only this life. If we go to the reservation, they can learn the white man's ways as well as our own. And when they are old enough, they can decide for themselves how they want to live." Yigo Hastian had successfully conquered his boulder and now stood atop it like a tiny king surveying his domain. "Mama," he called in Navajo, pointing excitedly at an eagle soaring overhead. "Atsa." "Yes, my son," Cordelia called back. "Eagle, strong and free, just like you will always be." That evening, after much discussion among the adults of the band, they reached a consensus. They would emerge from their hidden canyon home and travel to the new Navajo reservation, but on their own terms. They would build their lives within the boundaries set by the government, but would never forget the old ways, the sacred places, and the lessons learned during their years of freedom. As they prepared for the journey that would take them back into the world of treaties and boundaries, Cordelia stood at the edge of the canyon rim, looking out over the vast landscape that had become her true home. Keahani joined her there, his arm encircling her waist as they watched the sunset paint the desert in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Leaving your old life behind, marrying someone so different from yourself?" Cordelia leaned into his warmth, thinking of the Missouri farm where she had been born, the wagon train that had abandoned her, the life she might have lived if fate had not intervened in such a dramatic way. "The only thing I regret," she said, finally, "is that it took nearly dying for me to discover where I truly belonged." Below them in the camp, Hayasha was teaching their children a traditional song, her aged voice blending with their young ones in ancient harmonies that had echoed through these canyons for countless generations. The sound drifted up to them on the evening breeze, carrying with it all the pain and joy, struggle and triumph of their shared journey. Tomorrow they would begin the trek toward an uncertain future, carrying with them the lessons of survival, the strength of love that transcends all boundaries, and the knowledge that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with the courage to embrace what seems impossible. But tonight, they were exactly where they belonged, a family united by choice, rather than chance, bound together by love that had grown from the harsh soil of adversity into something beautiful and enduring. As the stars emerged in the darkening sky, Cordelia pressed her hand to her belly where a third child grew, wondering what new challenges and blessings awaited them in the world beyond their hidden sanctuary. Whatever came, she knew they would face it together, stronger for all they had overcome.